Picking up from where we left off in part 1, Malekith, having been defeated at Ulthuan, has taken his forces and fled north across the waters to the desolate wilderness of Naggaroth. This passage marked the end to the unity of Elves, with the scars Ulthuan now bore from the failed attack running deeper than the stonework. The Elves had been divided, and when Malekith landed on the shores of the Seas of Malice, beneath the shadows of the jagged mountains, he and his kin emerged as Dark Elves. On this land, they set about building a new elven capital that would put Ulthuan and the High Elves to shame and recreate the glory of Anerion's reign. Beaching his Black Ark castle onto the stony shore, Malekith began to plan for his new citadel. The Dark Elves were made for war, and whilst they fought with great skill, they lived only for the slaughter, and had no taste for brickwork and lumber. Seeing a clear path forward, Malekith sent his troops to the primitive humans in the east to collect workers. These captured slaves were quickly put to work, raising the walls around what would be Malekith's fortress. Christened Naggarond by the Witch King, the pirate port grew tall and sharp. As he established his new home base, Malekith sent his forces to test the High Elves, but were eventually repulsed by the Phoenix King and his forces. The Dark Elves then returned to Naggaroth in full, to regain their strength and plan for their next invasion. Morathi, in her spiteful and sneaky nature, could not allow the Phoenix King this victory, however, and during this retreat summoned forth a storm that scattered his fleet. Using her magics, she guided Malekith to the flagship, where the Phoenix Lord cast himself, fully armoured, into the harsh sea, opting to drown rather than fall prisoner to the Witch King and his delights. During the following respite from war, the Dark Elves built cities, and fortresses were raised as more slaves were captured for the construction efforts. This peace allowed the pleasure cults to spread like wildfire, none more so than those of Cain. As the cultists swept through the city, killing and maiming with joy and abandon, Malekith saw opportunity. Proclaiming himself a mortal incarnation of Cain, the cultists flocked to him, their feverish desire to kill now a weapon under his banner. But as Malekith's forces grew, so did the might of the High Elves. Their strengthening alliance with the dwarves the Witch King himself had once been ambassador to was now nearing a true alliance. Using his past knowledge of the dwarves, Malekith sent out troops to plunder and disrupt their merchant routes, all whilst flying the banner of Ulthuan. As the forces of Naggaroth grew wealthy on plunder, the dwarves sought to answer this great injustice and marched to war against those they believed to have attacked them, the High Elves. Malekith's people watched on with glee as their enemies turned on one another, the Dark Elves themselves readying for another attack against Ulthuan. Malekith and his forces sailed across the seas once more, reclaiming his home of Anlek in Naggaroth. As his slaves rebuilt Anerion's old palace to its past glory, he led his forces against the High Elves, coming to a stalemate at Griffin Gate. Personally leading his forces, Malekith took offence that his soldiers had been defeated by an elven prince named Tethys and took to the front line. There he pushed through the High Elves, cutting them down as they retreated further deeper into Ulthuan's territories. This back and forth of attack and counterattack continued for centuries, with Tethys recalling loyal elves to Ulthuan to strengthen their defences. Recognising the same tenacity in Tethys that he saw in Imric all those years ago, Malekith felt history repeat itself as he was slowly but surely pushed back into the Shadowlands, until finally the forces of the Dark Elves retreated from the restored Anlek to the Blighted Isle. Tethys, upon seeing the rebuilt palace, had it removed from existence. Through fire and magic, the towers were torn down, the structure destroyed entirely before the Elven Prince was satisfied enough to follow Malekith to the Blighted Isle. There, a grand battle took place, bloodiest in all of Ulthuan's history, as elves scrapped and fought with great fury and desperation. Eventually, Malekith realised that even his personal attention could not win this fight, and his forces retreated back across the sea, relinquishing this final foothold on Ulthuan's shores. Tethys did not leave the island with his troops, however, meeting his end on these bloody shores. It is not known whether it was Dark Elf assassins that took his life, or if his bodyguards feared that as Tethys stood before Widowmaker atop of the altar of Cain, that he would not resist it, and acted to prevent another Age of Darkness, before he could draw the blade. Both factions were broken. The Dark Elf forces were depleted and haggard, the High Elves were sick of death, and their lands were burning. As both broke apart to rebuild, an age of hateful peace fell upon the Elven kingdoms. As generations passed and time grew on, the High Elf souls began to soften, forgetting the hardships of war. To them, this meant peace. To Malekith, it was an exploitable weakness. Seeing that a change of tact was needed to take Ulthuan, he listened to his mother's counsel. He gathered his most fanatical devotees and sent them to learn the ways of murder and subterfuge from the assassins of Cain. These agents, once trained, travelled to the shores of Ulthuan, one at a time, across hidden routes. There, they took up simple lives as farmers, artists and smiths, all the while sowing dissent and spreading their poisonous beliefs. By the time the Phoenix King passed and Aethys was crowned, the heart of Ulthuan was darkened black. However, just as the High Elf souls had softened without war, so too had that of the Witch King. Malekith was growing distant, and even as the strength of Naggarond grew, his own waned. His mother, Morathi, watched with bitterness as her son withdrew, and set up insurrections within their own cities just to keep his warrior's fire burning within him. When word came to him that his old wife, Alisara, had remorse for abandoning Malekith to his dark fate and wished to return to his side, Morathi feared that her presence would only soften her son more, and set plans in motion to ensure she never reached their shores. Disguised, she infiltrated Ulthuan. There, she found a disgraced noble named Veldor, his desperation making him susceptible to her magics. She created upon him an illusion, convincing Veldor that the armed envoy carrying Alisara across the seas was in fact an army of elf defectors moving to aid Malekith. Seeking to regain status in the courts, Valador took his forces out to halt these reinforcements. The fight was costly on both sides, and as Valador claimed his Pyrrhic victory, running Alisara through with his spear, Morathi's magics ended. Faced with the truth of what he had done in killing innocent elves, Valador cast himself off the cliff and into the rocky waters below. It was with a feigned heavy heart that Morathi informed her son that she had received reports of Alisara's death by High Elf hands. The Witch King's rage spiked and engulfed the last shreds of hope he possessed. Marching into his war room, he summoned his council to plan retaliation. In his absence, the Dark Elf Lords had taken the opportunity to steal power and make plays for the throne of Naggarond, which became clear to Malekith now that he had returned. His response was swift. These lords, their families, and those they held dear were wiped out overnight, their swift end leaving a clear message for the Dark Elves of Naggarond. Malekith was king, and you live by his command. Still needing more time to fully regain his army's strength for another full-scale invasion, he turned to Morathi to activate his agents. Across Ulthuan, multiple fires, assassinations and kidnappings occurred overnight, with each day bringing more chaos to the city. As the people grew fearful of these dangers amongst them, the pleasure cults began to truly reform, bringing Ulthuan back to the days of Bel-Shannar's rule. As infiltrators were discovered, their numbers were restored and bolstered by more and more Naggarothi agents sent across. One of these agents managed to gain the position of Chancellor to the Phoenix King, and under the orders of Malekith, choked the life from Aethys with the golden scarves he paraded himself in. The news of the Phoenix King's death came at a poor time, however, as the Witch King was unable to truly enjoy this turn of events due to another piece of information he had learned. Morathi had killed Alisara. For her treachery, she was thrown into the depths of the dungeons, left to languish there for an entire year as her son decided what to do with her. In time, she was brought before him in the throne room, where he chose to allow no further punishment for her actions, seeing that the death of his wife strengthened his resolve, making him strong enough to do what must be done. He did warn the hag sorceress, however, that he would not accept a second attempt to meddle in his destiny, missing the knowing smile that crept across her face as she stalked from the throne room. In this time, the new Phoenix King Noel sought vengeance for Aethys. Hastily, he gathered a force together and sailed on Naggarond. Morathi's sorcerers foresaw their coming, however, and as the High Elves made ground in that harsh place, they were beset upon by their dark brethren, slaughtered, outnumbered and outprepared. As a few survivors escaped back across the seas, the Witch King devised his plans for a return invasion, his soul renewed and ready for war. Carrying with him quarried black stone and slaves to build, Malekith's first act upon arriving on the shores of his home was to once again rebuild Anlek. Rather than building for size or grandeur, the new fortress would act as a defensible staging ground for his assault on the Griffin Gate. As the Dark Elves rampaged across Naggarith, the Phoenix King struggled to gather his forces, having committed hard and lost in his previous invasion. Resorting to the conscription of militia fighting forces, waves of inexperienced bodies were thrown to hold the Griffin Gate. Although Malekith was unable to push beyond the gate, he enjoyed the situation. Each day, more and more untrained High Elves died at the hands of his forces, with little losses on his own side. He knew that soon there would be none left to hold the line, the forces of Ulthuan defeated, and a clear path made for him to the capital. In desperation, Morvail emptied his treasuries to build a grand High Elf fleet, cutting off Malekith's supply lines from Naggarond. This forced the Witch King's hand, and he pushed on the Griffin Gate. His forces took the stronghold, reveling in bringing pain to those within, savouring the process. This would prove to be their downfall, however, as this drawn-out battle allowed time for reinforcements to arrive, breaking the Dark Elves and forcing them back. Over decades, they were pushed back to the gates of Anlek, where a grand battle ensued. If not for a bolt thrower, they may have held longer, but that misaimed shot landing a harsh but not mortal blow on the High Elf's dragon Nightfang left the beast in a drawn-out rage and fits of death throw. Before he succumbed to the wound, the dragon had slammed into the walls of Anlek, cracking open the Dark Elf's defences. Once again forced from his home, Malekith fled back across the seas to Naggarond. When he arrived, he slew his admirals, whose failure to break the High Elf blockade had caused his downfall. Such was the Witch King's rage that none dared approach him for weeks, save for Morathi. The only silver lining in this mess for Malekith was the death of Morvail. The Phoenix King had been plagued by nightmares since the start of Malekith's invasion, a curse his sorcerers had placed onto the Phoenix Lord. Eventually, he succumbed to his despair, throwing himself into the sacred flames of Ashuran, his horrendous death giving him peace from his twisted dreams. Malekith had seen the rise and fall of 7 Phoenix Kings, and vowed he would live to see the death of all that would come next. Taking a step back from his wars against Ulthuan, Malekith looked out onto the wider world. In the thousands of years of his life, the world outside of Ulthuan had developed and was now home to many ascendant powers. As was his way, he decided that these strengths were his to claim, and that they would aid in his final goal. Rather than declare outright war on the entire world, Malekith rebuilt his forces and renewed his agent network. He sent some to Ulthuan as before, but his agents were also sent across to all 4 corners of the world. As his network of spies grew, he became aware of everything that was taking place. It became common that he would learn of an event, or a fleet landing, or a battle's results, before word reached its intended ears. His raiding fleet sailed out, pillaging coasts and returning abundant with wealth, slaves and treasures. Ports were burned, coastal castles were sacked, and ransoms were taken by those hoping to buy their safety. Dark Elf ambassadors worked their silver tongues, alluring those who had tasted Dark Elf steel to forget their grudges. The emissaries seeing the secret delights of those who they talk to, offering them to give in to those urges and feed their needs. The Witch King's puppets grew many, and Malekith revelled in the new ways that he could manipulate his enemies. As his wealth grew, so did his forces, eventually building to the point that he would be confident to unleash the fury of the Nagarothi down upon Ulthuan once more. Whilst this is not where Malekith's story ends, with him attempting more invasions of Ulthuan, as well as fighting the other races of the world, it's where we'll be leaving the Witch King for the time being. We've seen how the events of his life have shaped the elf that Malekith has become, from the drawing of Widowmaker by his father Anarion, to the assassination of Alisara by his mother in his later life. There's still so much to tell about Malekith's attempts at global conquest, but we'll save those for another time. For now, we're going to focus on some more characters from the world that was, as well as some of the major events of its timeline. If you've enjoyed this video and don't want to miss any future fantasy videos, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps me to continue what we're doing. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.